Professor Sean Kelly. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You once shared with me William Blake's line, "Eternity is in love with the productions of time," which is just brilliant. Many people hear eternity as something outside of time, like a static and perfected realm. I'm wondering if we think instead of eternity as the living depth of time itself, how then does Blake's line change? Could it be read as a vision in which the infinite delights in the finite, and in which the ongoing process of becoming is not a flaw, but the very site of love? I know that's quite long, but this is the kind of stuff that you have thought about and written about so much. There's a lot to unpick there, so just take it whichever direction you like.
Yeah. Blake, of course, is a master of the poetic imagination. So in that statement, I'm going to actually turn to your question, which is revealing as well. We tend to often think of eternity or the eternal as being outside of time, as you said. And I think this reveals something important about the way we conceptualize or imagine time, and that is through our spatial intuition. So you might recall that Kant identified two fundamental forms of intuition through which we make meaning, through which the world appears to us in a meaningful, coherent way. One is through the spatial intuition, the other is through the temporal intuition. But it's also the case that time itself is often spatialized. So when we try to imagine time or imagine a temporal relation, we often do so in spatial terms. So in this case, if we think of our normal experience of time as contrasted with eternity or the eternal, we speak of it as being outside of time. And in many religious traditions, mythological traditions, that outside is pictured as being, let's say, in the heavens, or even in the something which is beyond the heavens that we normally perceive. So the ancient Greeks, for instance, made a distinction between matter as it exists below the sphere of the moon and matter beyond the sphere of the moon associated with the stars. And these move in different ways, like the moon is constantly waxing and waning and so on, and we can see imperfections on its surface. But the stars seem to move, first of all, they don't seem to change, so they're eternal in that sense. And they move in perfect circles. At least most stars do. The planets don't. This is the problem of the planets, but it was still believed that the planets were the same substance as the stars, different from the moon, unchanging, therefore eternal. And they're the furthest away. So they're pictured as the outer sphere of the heavens. But then there is an intuition or a concept of something even beyond the sphere of the stars, which of course we can't see with our eyes, but we can imagine as a realm or a space that is beyond the sphere of the fixed stars. When I think about this, I also realize that, okay, they're looking up the heavens, but they're also having other kinds of experience. Today, we might call them non-ordinary experiences. It could be something as common as a dream, or less common, like out-of-body experiences, shamanic journeying, near-death experiences, where people, even Plato, let's say at the end of the Republic, ends that dialogue with the myth of this individual who dies and has an out-of-body experience and travels beyond the sphere of the fixed stars. So presumably humans have always had these kinds of non-ordinary experiences where they find themselves in a different kind of realm. So we seem to have, at the very least, two realms, we want to call that, of experience, one of which is not only associated with our embodiedness here on Earth, but with a certain experience of time, which is always in flux, is associated with birth, growth, decay, and death. That's the sphere below the moon. And another kind of time sense, which is linked to these special kinds of non-ordinary experiences, which, at least when we remember them and try to put words to them, suggest a different realm that is outside of the realm of the ordinary. And it seems to have its own time sense, which, for lack of a better word, we can call eternity. Okay. So I'm going on here, but I'm trying to reconstruct something of what might lead us to this idea of eternity versus time.
Yeah.
And what is that basic meaning?
Yeah.
All right. So now the second part, though. Okay. So eternity is in love with the productions of time.
Yeah.
So here we have not only a distinction between these two basic kinds of experience and maybe realms, to speak spatially, but the idea of a love between the two. So even though they are distinct and we live most of our lives here below in ordinary states of consciousness with our ordinary time sense, there are these other realms, the eternal, but there is a love or a longing for these two to be together somehow. And I think this is what maybe appeals to both of us when we read those lines from Blake. So maybe as we continue our conversation, we can explore that link, that erotic link between the two realms a bit more. But yes, to your love and delight.
When you told me that quote in our last conversation, I felt like the entirety of existence is embedded within this line. That's why I wanted to open this conversation, and why we both share this love for temporality and the richness therein with regards to how it pertains to the human experience, what it is to be a human, what it is to be alive, what it is to inhabit this universe. So what I intuitively sense when I hear this line is eternity as conferring divine intelligence, something beyond the more than human, higher power. And that somehow time then is like a matrix, a manifold, a stage, production. What is a production? A play, a drama is a production. Yeah, you talk about it as a production. So there's something about time facilitating productions, a production that it produces. Time produces something. There's something about consciousness and the experience of consciousness here, the kind of sub-lunar realm, to draw on what you just said. This was not familiar to me, what you just said about the different things. There's something going on there about time allowing and facilitating some sort of dramatic unfoldment that the divine intelligence wishes for, seeks for, that it cannot have or experience in its domain, and whatever temporal kind of quality is occurring there. I don't know how complete the idea is that I've just articulated, but I think that's why I'm so passionate about time, as it seems to me like a key. It's a key, it's a gateway to the nature of our human experience. And it's not less than the eternal realm. It's required by the eternal realm. It's the child of the eternal realm, whatever the eternal realm even is. And we could still keep unpicking that about how eternity still pertains to time. And I think that will come back when we talk about Nietzsche and the eternal recurrence and stuff. We'll keep disentangling this notion as we talk, as we converse.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Yeah. As you were speaking, I was aware that, see, on the one hand, in the Neoplatonic tradition, for instance, and even with Plato, there's the sense that the phenomenal realm of space and time, of finitude, is the product of the eternal. For Plotinus, it's conceived in terms of an emanation. The one emanates mind, which emanates the world soul, and individual souls, which emanates eventually matter. So all of that is produced, is emanated out of the eternal. But then there's the other sense of production, which you revealed, which I think is so important. And that is that production, in the sense of something real, in the way that we would think of real as involving experience, suffering, delight. And this is where the Blake comes in too, so eternity's in love with the productions of time, So time is where productions happen, as you were saying. So something happens in this realm and only through this realm,
Yeah.
which makes things real. And presumably here we could think of Whitehead as well, that Whitehead's view of God, but even Hegel, Hegel heretically, by some accounts, famously said that God must create. So it's not that creation is an option, that God could have created, might not have created. Philosophically, he'll talk about the true infinite. If we think conceptually about the infinite, we can picture the infinite again as being outside of the finite. But to do so is to make the infinite, is to finitize the infinite in an inauthentic way, is to put an artificial boundary around the infinite, if we think of it as being outside of the finite. The true infinite, according to Hegel, must include the finite.
Yeah.
The finite must be in the infinite. And in that sense, like the infinite is only infinite by virtue of the finite and its productive nature. So we could maybe get into this later. I think this becomes most obvious with the advent of Christianity in particular. We do see it, in other forms of integral non-dualism with, in India, for instance, Advaita Vedanta. If we go from Shankara to Ramanuja, so Shankara's non-dualism is basically the one without a second, and from whose perspective the many, time, and so on can be thought of as pure Maya or illusion. But then you have the Ramanuja, and then somebody like Sri Aurobindo and the whole Tantric tradition in India, which sees the many and two-ness as being integral to the one. So the true one is only one by virtue of its embrace of the many, and is only real through the many. So this is a kind of integral non-dualism. And in the West, this becomes most apparent with the idea of the incarnation. So the Greek logos, the cosmic logos, the Platonic realm of ideas, becomes flesh. So in the beginning was the logos, but the logos descends, becomes flesh, and not only that, is born, lives, dies, and is reborn. So the whole death, rebirth mystery happening here on earth is not other than the cosmic logos. Okay, so that's in the Christian incarnational view, but it's essentially the same idea that we find in the Hindu Tantric non-dual tradition. I think I went off on a bit of a side lane there, but
no, it's fascinating. You just have so much information about the different traditions, and I think what's really enriching for people and is not so commonly taught is the cross synthesis between different traditions and different worldviews, and actually where they converge and come together. And this is also something we're not taught, which is what makes somewhere like CIIS and PCC so special, is the evolution of mind, of consciousness. Even CIIS, it's about integral studies. It makes me think of Jean Gebser, us moving to the integral worldview. You speak about integral time. Yeah, so there's maybe that's something just to touch on quite briefly of what that means for something to be integral, integrated, because it's not so immediately apparent to someone not immersed in this academic realm.
No, it's true. Yeah, integral time. Yeah, so it's this term integral. I'm getting it from Sri Aurobindo and Gebser, as you say, but I think it's a word that points to a strand in the world's traditions, as I was just alluding to, that we find in both the East and the West, and in indigenous cultures as well, though it gets philosophically elaborated post-axial age and once we get into the world religions and the philosophical traditions that are associated with them. And we can call it integral. Another way of thinking of it is with respect to, let's say Plato would talk about the true. So if we have an intuition of truth and we ask, what is true? What is the truth? Now, Hegel famously, coming at the end of that Western philosophical tradition, beginning with Plato, says in the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit, the true is the whole, he says. But then he qualifies it and he says, but the whole is nothing other than the process of its own development, of its own evolution. So here we're getting into the idea of what, say, Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry would call the most important insight of the modern period, according to them, namely that we live in a time developmental cosmos. So the cosmos is not something that is just given all at once. It's not a static block, at least that's not the only way that we should conceive of the cosmos. That a fundamental dimension of cosmos, of order, of reality, is that it's an ongoing process, but not just mere flux. There is flux, but it's an ongoing developmental process, which can be thought of as the actualization of potential.
So would Brian Swimme, sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all.
Brian Swimme counter the notion of the Minkowski, like a block universe? He would counter that, yeah?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he would honor the truths that is revealed in those equations.
Yeah.
And I think he wouldn't want to deny relativistic physics in terms of both the phenomena that are observed and the mathematical formalisms that correspond to the phenomena. But when we go from those to the sort of ontological or cosmological vision that says that time is an illusion, that there really is no fundamental change. Einstein himself, as Arabella said, that the time is one of the most stubborn illusions. I think Brian would deny that. And this is why he's so drawn to Whitehead and process philosophy. Yeah, so for him, time in the sense of development, so not just flux, but flux as well, but in particular, time as a developmental process going from potential to greater actualization and complexity is something fundamentally real about the cosmos and our experience of being part of this cosmos, he would say. And in that sense, he's one with Hegel.
Okay, so I feel like you and I have a very similar conception of time. And my problem with that is I don't disagree with Brian's perspective of what you've just outlined anywhere. This is a real both and situation, and a very, indeed, Hegelian sort of dialectic in that way. It's a real synthesis. Undoubtedly, time is real. Time is happening. We're born, we live, and we die. You can't unbreak an egg, and so on. And our sun has been burning for however many, like billions of 4.5 billion years. I forget what it is, something like that.
Yeah.
And as that's happened, as the star in the center of this solar system has been burning, it's allowed complex carbon-based life, i.e. us and everything on Earth, to develop. And so, yes, that's true, what you just said, this unfoldment towards greater complexity and coherence. And that is an intrinsic facet of this evolving universe. And yet, does God, cosmic consciousness, the all, the one, say, hi, my name's God, I'm 14 point whatever billion years old? I don't think so. I don't think the idea that is it, and there are parameters to it where time, there's an edge to time. It's also like time, what time is it in a sort of far away, distant galaxy with a black hole in the, do you know what I mean? It's just time is not this constant. I don't even really know what time is, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you're not alone. The greatest minds and have struggled with this question. And yeah, but I would agree with you. A couple of things occurred to me as you were speaking. Yes, I would not deny the obvious experience of flux. And I affirm in my own experience and conceptually the truth of the idea of development and evolution. And I have my own conceptual intuitions, and I've had my own direct experiences of states of being or realms of existence, which are hard to speak about coherently, but seem to exist, if we can use the word exist, in a realm outside of time, that they simply are, in the way that Parmenides at the beginning of the Western tradition was famous for saying. He simply said, is, not becoming, that the one is. But the problem, the challenge with that view, though, as Hegel put it, is that's all we could say. If we're serious about a realm or a state of being which does not manifest itself through development, through distinctions between before and after, or other kinds of categorical distinctions like that. Then, says Hegel, there's really nothing more to be said other than, perhaps as Parmenides said, is. That's all we can say. So as we say anything more about it, we're introducing the kinds of distinctions that are endemic to our experience within time, within the temporal process. And so Hegel characterized that perspective, which he associated with Schelling, or at least Schelling's followers, who were fond of speaking about the absolute in terms of identity. Okay, so pure identity, that's like one without a second in the tradition of Advaita Vedanta. If we think of and speak of the absolute or the whole purely as identity with no difference and no distinctions, Hegel says that's equivalent to the night in which all cows are black. That's how he characterized it. Schelling's vision of the absolute, not a very kind characterization. The night in which all cows are black. In other words, it's vacuous. There's really nothing can be said about it. On the other hand, for those of us who have had these kinds of experiences, they are very real. And the challenge is, how do we talk about them? So somebody like Blake, who I think also had these experiences, will speak of them poetically.
Yes.
Not abstractly, conceptually, in terms of the principle of identity, but he'll say that eternity is in love with the productions of time. Okay, so that here we have something more that's going on than a mere assertion of time as being illusory, or of there being a realm beyond time where everything is the nunc stans, the eternal present, which is immovable, unchanging.
I'm having some ideas as you're
Does that make sense?
talking. Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I think, sorry, I should write something down quickly that just came up as you were speaking. No, it's like really generative, everything you've just outlined. As you were talking, I recalled something. I think it was actually, I'm pretty sure it was you who said this in one of our Jung seminars, quoting from Jakob Böhme, the German mystic, I don't know if he was 16th or 17th century, who differentiated between bis and abyss.
Wow.
And that really got me. I found it really captivating, this notion. So when I think back to eternity and what we mean by eternity and its relationship to time, I think for many, when we think of the absolute, and perhaps this is this Hegelian reduction of the black cows and the night, is the abyss. Like the eternal is almost this great void or nothingness, the vacuum. But what if it's actually bis? Everything, which is complete fullness, which is more like the Bohmian plenum. And so what I was just intuitively sensing and grasping in quite an ineffable way that, again, is also difficult to convey, like imagining what it would be to be cosmic consciousness, or that level of consciousness there would be a kind of beholding or apprehending and witnessing of all, which is somehow absolutely bewitching and magical and delightful, right? And then what is allowed for and facilitated by the kind of finite, constrained realm is exploration. Because what are we doing here? We are exploring. Do you know what I mean? It's like going into a forest, walking down a path through a forest and looking around. Whereas to be in the bis and the wholeness, you are looking at it from a bird's eye view. You're still looking, and you can still look around. But it's like a sort of 360 eye, but the eye is still witnessing. So there's still an active participatory. It's not static or inert. It's alive still and dynamic. Yeah. But it's just experiencing all of it now. Whereas we're not experiencing all of it now. We're experiencing it sequentially, which is very different, but it's still experiencing time. And this, for me, is the crux of it. So when people talk about timelessness, I'm like, how can anything happen but in time? Time is mind, and mind is time. The stage is time. The matrix is time. The cosmos is time. But iterated in different manifestations.
Yeah, I'm with you. So we could even think of So on the one hand, we have this initial distinction between time and eternity, but once we think of things happening through time, so the eternal also happens through time. Otherwise, it's just this abyss, as you're saying. So along with that, these two poles, I imagine we could think of intermediary phases or realms between these two poles. In other words, instead of just having, let's say, God and us, or God and the cosmos, as we think of it,
Yeah.
we could think of intermediary beings, angels, let's say.
Yeah.
Or like Aurobindo, to get back to him, he talks about the distinction between our everyday personality and what he calls the psychic being, or what we might think of as the soul. And the psychic being for him has had many lives, so they're and reincarnates. So the psychic being, though, presumably would have its own distinct time sense, which is not that of our individual lives, which begin with birth and end with death, and have that singular trajectory, that arrow of time and its singular trajectory from birth to death. But the soul, the deeper soul, I think of it as a higher dimensional person, would be constituted by these various subpersonalities, which we think of as lives. But if, for instance, at the moment of death, this personality, as it reaches its terminus, and prior to the next incarnation, if you believe in reincarnation, there presumably is a moment, in quotation marks, where the soul nature or the psychic being wakes up to itself, or can at least wake up to itself, and its own unique time sense, which presumably would be of a higher dimensionality than the time that we experience. So I'm imagining, this intermediate realm,
Yes.
populated by these souls.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are even more complex or higher dimensional beings, which we could think of as angels, before we get to God, which would be the eternal, as we normally conceive of it. But once we get to God, this is where it gets very hard to think of or speak of, because God would be the pole, presumably.
Yeah.
Since there can't be anything. Yeah, if God is truly infinite, then there can't be anything outside of God. Therefore, God is conceptually indistinguishable from the whole. And once we're really contemplating the whole, then it gets, I think we need to, this is where we really need to turn to poetry, or the poetic mode, to try to give some flesh to our intuitions, voice to our experiences.
Totally. We can't talk about that which is inherently symbolic, like it's from the realm of symbol, right? We can't talk about that in prosaic language. We're talking about something that stretches beyond, and poetry and the poetic medium, whether that's cinematic or music, it allows us to go beyond, this realm. I'm also fairly certain that what you've said is true about these intermediary beings. Christopher M. Bache talks about this in LSD and the Mind of the Universe, where he literally encounters these archetypal beings, which he describes as living in a different order of time. They're like in the galactic order of time. You know what I mean? They're like actually inhabiting a different level and layer of reality, where one inhalation and exhalation is the birth and the death of a star. And that makes sense to me. It's like a cascading wave and a nested hierarchy of kind of temporal frequencies, all undulating and breathing together, almost like the harmonic series. It's all encasing and enfolding, and it's, again, these different, it's all kind of temporal waves. And it would make sense that, exactly, it's not, and this is where I struggled with Jung, or I disagreed with Jung a little bit. He, as far as I understood, saw consciousness and human consciousness as this kind of apex emergence and rising, remembering, and we're actually unevolved. It was like level 1. It's like kindergarten. There's like these PhD students, like these galactic, like mega archetypal beings creating worlds, birthing worlds.
Love that. Yeah. So your description of Chris, yeah, we've talked about this a number of times. I think the three of us resonate quite strongly around these views. That view that you described so beautifully, I think first gets wonderfully articulated by Fechner in his little book, the little book on life after death. But I think he also talks about it in his main work, Zend Avesta. But yeah, so he makes the analogy of, he says, we're born three times. We're born out of the womb. And does he say three times? Yeah, so we die to the womb and we're born as the people that we come to know ourselves as being in the body. Or maybe it says we're born twice in that sense. But then when we die, we die to this life and we awaken as living members of the living earth. And, or as, I think that's how he puts it. But he conceives of the earth too as being a member within the sort of solar system, the body of the solar system, which is a member of the galaxy, and so on. I love that. And yet here we are in these fragile, seemingly so limited, vulnerable bodies with a poignantly short time span. And it's through these bodies that something very, to get back to your earlier point about this temporal realm being where productivity, where stuff happens, something happens that is very valuable, presumably even to the angels, even to God in many traditions, that there's something very special about this middle realm. So there's the microphysical realm where all sorts of fascinating stuff is happening, and there's the angelic realm where amazing stuff must be happening. But it's in this middle realm that something all important of cosmic significance seems to be unfolding. And the question is, what? What is it about this realm and our embeddedness in this particular flow of time that is so intrinsically valuable and important? What do you think about that?
As in, what is it that constitutes the special quality of this time?
Yeah. Of this time, of the human, of the
this
human
kind of
time
time.
sense. Yeah.
This might also be a nice segue for us into Chronos and Kairos. As for the most part, what we're experiencing is a chronology, is a chronological time, so it's sequential time. And we're all inhabiting, for the most part, the same state of consciousness, so like alpha and brainwave consciousness, We're not all tripping on LSD. We're all there, and the nature of that kind of time, of Chronos time, is it's sequential. It's sequential time. And that is fundamentally characterized by anticipation and not knowing what is going to come tomorrow. Yeah. And this is the quintessential arrow of time. You remember, providing your memory is intact. And I've been thinking about memory a lot as well, and what it is and how it plays into the universe and temporality. Because without memory, who are you and what are we? But providing your memory is intact, which is fundamental to having coherent consciousness, you are, or your sense of self usually is predicated on all that's come before you and the experiences you accrue, and then how you relate to those experiences, and then how that shapes your sense of what is to come. We live in constant anticipation of what is to come. And then that relates to our hopes, our fears, our dreams, our ambitions, our deepest desires. And then this herein is the bundle of what it is to be human. Our frailties and our virtues, it all exists within this continuum of time and the potential of transformation to occur. When you watch great drama, when you watch Shakespeare, or in any great drama, it's about character development. You want to watch how a character develops. Maybe they go through tests and challenges. And you're considering this notion of what is it like to have an intrinsic character or quality? And then how is your character right? It's like nature versus nurture. How is that then shaped by the experiences given to you? And then how much agency and free will do you have to overcome those or become a bigger, better person? So this is all connected with time and this anticipatory quality of time.
Yeah.
Virginia Woolf wrote about time beautifully. It's been a long time since I read this. I think it's in her memoir, A Sketch of the Past. She talks about the experience of time when you're young, how it's this like great pool in front of you. This speaks again to this sort of spatialization of time and how we need to use metaphor to really ground our experience, because experience is abstract. The future is in front of you. You have the sense of it. Literally, you're spatially situated. And the older you get, you reflect on your life. You look back on your life. Yeah, there's isn't there? You're situated. There's a directionality to it. You look back and it's behind you. So I think this is all integral to the quality of time down here. And what makes it so beautiful, the irrevocability of time. It's irrevocable. What's gone is gone, and people die and we grieve. And there is so much beauty in that, and this fundamental impermanence and change. And again, to come back to these different temporal frequencies and phases of time, the seasons turn year on, year out, and they have done for millions of years. They turn. And with it, think of the change that has occurred within that stage of continuity, the continuity of that, and then all the things that have changed, how humans, this is quite androcentric, it's very human-centric. Obviously, there's a whole host of animals on the earth, but humans have a particularly complex level of consciousness. So if you think about the development of humanity within that, how much has changed, and then also how much is still the same, like how much we will still share with our Paleolithic ancestors, painted on the walls of caves, who looked upon the starry night sky and felt the sense of the infinite, of the sacred, and felt compelled to articulate it somehow, who also no doubt would have felt jealousy and love and companionship and maybe betrayal. So it's this comparison between the dialectic between change and flux and that which is sustained and the same, and that all is required and is allowed for by time and the nature of time.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
That was, sorry, I really went off on one there.
No, it's wonderful. I was just picturing these handprints in the caves, just imagining what kind of quality of consciousness accompanied the urge to make these handprints. And the way I imagine it is there's this moment of stepping out of the mist. Jung talks about his first remembered moment of self-consciousness, of self-reflexivity, where we have these moments where we just emerge out of a kind of fog and have the sense that we are here in this moment. And I picture our Paleolithic ancestors marking such moments with these handprints. And in many ways, that seems to be distinctive of what the human is, which is not to say that other animals are not conscious.
Yes, indeed.
I have no doubt that they are.
Absolutely.
Sentient, they're conscious, and many of them are even self-reflexive in some sense. But I don't believe they have that experience that humans do of suddenly sticking their heads out from the fog, or Bilbo in The Hobbit when they're going through is it the Old Forest or is it Fangorn Forest? I think it's
Mirkwood.
I think it's Mirkwood. You're right. It's going through Mirkwood. Yeah, and they're lost, and at a certain point, Bilbo, he's small enough, he climbs up this tree and manages to stick his head above the bole of the tree, sees the whole forest spread out before him. So there are these moments where we can stick our heads up and have a sense that we are, and where we are, when we are. And I know in my own experience, these moments tend to be fleeting. I don't have anywhere near as many of them as I feel I ought to have, because when those moments arise, it's precisely in those moments where I think we can grasp not only the true in the Platonic sense and the beautiful, but the good in the sense of what we have an intuitive sense of what is right and of what we are called to do in that moment. And that can be terrifying, at least in my experience. It's terrifying when I suddenly realize, oh my God, here I am, I have a choice. And basically the choice to me is, in my own case, it's almost always, or often it has been, a choice to speak in Nietzschean terms, to curse or to bless the moment, to approach where one is. And often that's in face of an other, usually another human being, but it can be any other that we suddenly are aware of that we're in relationship to. We can close our heart in terror or in hatred or in greed, or we can open the heart and bless. And whether that's through being honest or being forgiving or some form of blessing. So to me, that's the good. And that is what's only possible in these moments, the sort of Kairos that you mentioned
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah.
So the Kairos are these moments of time where it becomes possible to actualize the good in a way that is not possible at other moments.
That is
But it's also the
beautiful.
oh, thank you. Yeah. But it's also the moments where the true it reveals itself. The beautiful, the true, and the good reveal themselves or can reveal themselves. Their true nature are revealed in these moments.
Let's run with that a little bit, because this has opened us onto Kairos, which is the kind of thematic thread of this podcast season. What is then Kairos? That's really beautiful what you've just said. I've not heard it couched in those terms as a moment to realize the good, to both behold, apprehend it, and then somehow realize it or anchor it in this domain. And there's something then about the prosaic, the mundane, Chronos, which is not necessarily fertile. It's not necessarily a fertile ground for this superlative aesthetic experience. It's wherein it's from that, let's call Chronos the kind of this foggy time. For whatever reason, and I don't know what the reason is, Kairos emerges, reveals itself, it strikes you. This has been my experience anyway. It strikes you, it takes you. And it is intrinsically connected to the aesthetic experience also for me. And there's a transformative quality to it. It seizes you whether you want to or not. Like when you behold a particularly beautiful sunset, or you listen to a Beethoven quartet, and you are taken to this other dimension, this other kind of quality of time where it all makes sense. And I love that. I love that you referenced The Hobbit, because I've just actually finished listening to that again. I read it when I was much younger. I just re-listened. That's how I knew it was Mirkwood, because I just finished re-listening to that, and that's just such a powerful metaphor to see the forest canopy. Again, we come back to spatialize our perspective. And anyway, I'm probably going off on a tangent now, but yeah, please talk to us about Kairos and maybe aesthetics if you want as well.
I love where you were going with that. Yeah, again, to connect with your comment about how we must, in many ways, spatialize. We can't help but spatialize or appeal to our intuitions of space to give form, to body forth our experiences of time, including kairotic time. So it occurred to me that we could think of Kairos as a particular feature of the landscape of time. So if we think of time as a landscape, then we can think of Kairos as a mountaintop, let's say, or as a sacred spot, a power spot. Yeah. So in that sense, there are many kairoi. We could think of like a variegated landscape, but with power spots, and each one of these power spots is a kairotic moment. But at least in the Christian tradition, where the word really comes from, it's a New Testament term, kairos. I'm pretty sure the kairos it comes from, I think it's It precedes the New Testament, but it comes to be associated with the advent of the Christ, of the opportune moment where the divine reveals itself in time. Again, this is what's peculiar about the Christian tradition, is that there's the idea that the eternal breaks into time and actually reveals its true nature in, through, and in a sense as time, but as time transformed. But so if in that sense, the Kairos would be like a central feature of the landscape. It would be the holy mountain, the axis mundi, the world tree. So that point around which everything revolves, which we get with the idea of the axial age as well. But as I've heard you speak before, and which I resonate with a lot as well, when we think of like the topology of the cosmos and of time, so the landscape of time, the topological landscape of time, we could think of the kairotic dimension as being fractal, right? So there's the whole landscape is fractalized, which means, yes, there is a kind of central axis, which would be the kairos, but then there are multiple kairoi that all, in a sense, holographically reflect each other and refer to each other. At least that's true in my individual experience. I think it's true also as I look back on the evolution of the history of ideas, the evolution of consciousness. I see these fractal mirrorings and repetitions within ideas. At the same time, I do believe, and this is where I think that's another peculiarity of the Christian tradition, though we do find it in the earlier Zoroastrian tradition as well. What happens uniquely, apparently, with the Zoroastrian tradition and then with Judaism and then Christianity, I know you know this, but maybe for our auditors or viewers who are not familiar with it, what happens with Zoroastrianism and then Judaism and then Christianity in the most developed way is that instead of the indigenous and ancient Greek and ancient Hindu view of time as just an eternally recurring cycle, there's the idea that time, in some sense, has a beginning, as paradoxical as that sounds. It's moving in a specific direction toward an absolute end. Now, in the Christian tradition, that end, which is the eschaton, or at least it's preceded by the eschaton being the final days, the end times, there's maybe an end or a goal that is after the eschaton, but we could talk about what that might mean. But in the middle, the axis around which it all turns is the Kairos. And that's the Christ event. But even in that tradition, that event is mirrored fractally in the history that precedes the coming of Christ and is mirrored after that event and is repeated in all of the moments of metanoia, the transformations of consciousness, which is the Greek word for conversion, right? Metanoia. So whenever the mind is radically transformed, wakens up to the true nature of reality, which for Aurobindo would be as infinite consciousness, infinite sat, infinite being, consciousness, and bliss, sat, chit, ananda. So if you're in that tradition, or in Zen with the Satori event, when the mind awakens to Buddha nature, or in the Christian tradition, when it awakens, in Blake's terms, to the Christ as imagination, as the creative imagination, that's also the Kairos. So Kairos is a possibility of consciousness that is given to us moment by moment, if only we would have eyes to see and ears to hear. And it's a particular moment, or it was given in a particular moment in the Christian tradition. And it's pointing in the direction of another moment, which I think is actually the times that we live in now, but that's more eschaton than Kairos. So that was a bit of a...
No, that was amazing.
A bit of a... No.
That was amazing. There's a couple of things I wanted to respond to. First of all, this idea of Christ as a kind of kairotic moment, I wasn't familiar with that concept. I've actually never heard that. And I was only aware of Kairos's, the term's Greek origins, not that it appeared in the New Testament. This makes me think to earlier in our conversation, we were talking about the eternal being in love with the productions of time. At that moment, like, the infinite and the finite, the rupture of the infinite within the finite as being a site of love. And this dialectic between being and becoming as being a site of love what was Christ if not love? You know what I mean? He was the ultimate embodiment of love, of agape, of not just agape love, but also erotic love. That's actually been denied him, I think, him and Mary Magdalene. And there's been a lot that's been taken out of the Bible. And I really feel like Jesus and Christ consciousness was about love, pure love, right, for all. So I find that quite interesting. This avatar comes down with this high level of consciousness, and there's a sort of, he is eternal. He transcends, ostensibly transcends death. He has an ascension, and how this is connected to love. So this is new for me. This is this is actually really enriching my understanding of Kairos and time and what the opportune moment means. It's really tuning into that omnibenevolence. And that is so beautiful. How time, I'm now seeing how time is connected not just to beauty, because this for me is abundantly clear, but also to love. And then there's somehow like the connection between time, not as just a feature of the universe, as like a physical law, but like as intrinsically divine and therefore intrinsically loving. And how there is something so beautiful about aging. I'm now going off on one, but that's all the stuff that was coming up for me as you were talking. It's just gorgeous. I then also was wondering your opinion on how people can identify the kairotic moment. And you're speaking about, I love this variegated landscape, this kind of fractal, the Kairos as fractal. So it's like maybe there's this kind of holy mountain and then these little miniature hills, reflection that are available for people on a small scale within their lives. You said if only people have the eyes to see it. And I think one of the great problems about our society is that people have been so anesthetized. We've been so conditioned. We've become so divorced from the sacred and from our divine entanglement with the cosmos and these moments whereby the doors of perception are blasted wide open and we have access to the infinite. How can people tune into them, maybe even cultivate them? Are they something that can be cultivated, or are they simply bestowed upon us? Just like some more practical advice, I think, for people and how they can tune themselves to this.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that there's probably a dimension of, I think everybody can. I do imagine, like most things, there are innate tendencies, predispositions, that some people will be more prone to these experiences than others. On the other hand, I also recognize that we need the conditions for them. So even if in my own case, I had my earliest experiences were somewhere between the age of 2 and 4, because I remember I was in nursery school when these experiences first started happening. But I'm imagining, wow, what if I were in Palestine right now, or in Sudan? If I had been in Palestine or Sudan where I was starving or being bombed, and it's unlikely, it's not impossible, but I imagine it would be a lot less likely that I would have had these experiences. So I want to say just from the outset that I consider, despite whatever suffering I've experienced in my life, I've had my toll of suffering like everybody else. I also recognize that I've had a privileged existence. And I'm sure I've been hungry occasionally, but I've never
Been in a war zone.
and I've never faced like days of hunger. And so for those of us, and I assume you maybe count yourself among those like me who have led a relatively privileged life, certainly compared to what so many people are going through. For people with enough privilege, then I think what's really essential, particularly in our own times, is to find the time to slow down. It's obvious and it's cliche, but find some way to pause the Chronos, the kind of momentum of Chronos. And in my own case, that is, I've for almost going on almost 50 years now, I've had a practice of Tai Chi, and then which developed into more different forms of Qigong and standing meditation and so on. So I do that daily. I occasionally miss a day, but I try to give myself like an hour at least a day to do that. There were periods where I would do more like sitting meditation. Anything that will halt or slow down the Chronos dimension, by which I mean the habitual automatic pilot of the inertia of the day, which whatever that looks like. So for many people, it'll be whatever it is that we tend to do without thinking, without choosing to do, where it's more or less automatic pilot. If we can choose to do something else where it's relatively quiet, ideally where there is a more expansive opening of the sense doors. I spend so much of my day looking at this screen to the point where, falling asleep at night in the hypnagogic state, often just as I'm falling asleep, all of a sudden, boom, there'll be this blue screen that will appear. Oh my God. I say to myself as I'm falling into the dream world, here it is again, the screen that's been imprinted not only on my retinas, but obviously on my psychic screen. So I think it's really important to get away from the screen and allow what we have evolved to be as mammals, to have these eyes that are eyes and our senses open to the non-built environment as much as possible, if we can find that. Now, for some people, that might not be possible, but at least turn off the screen, have relative quiet. If there can be any organic forms, it can be a plant. So something other than human, organic, and relative quiet, having these moments. I think that's essential. Then there's also more structured forms of contemplative practice, whether that's meditation, qigong, prayer. I think that's essential. This can be greatly assisted, as it has been in my own case, and I believe in your case as well, through study. Traditionally, there'd be the reading of sacred texts, whether it's sutras or gospels, or it could be poetry, listening to classical music, Beethoven's quartets, or whatever the music is, but particularly in the classical tradition, I would say. But any music that will take one out of the frontal cortex and into the deeper rhythms that resonate with the archetypal realm.
Beautiful.
These kinds of things, I think, are essential, and they all feed each other. So if one is reading the right material and exposing oneself to beauty, whether through music or art, visual art, or really good literature, which I know you do as well. We both have our English literature background. To me, that's essential.
Yeah.
These kinds of things. But I'd love to know what helps you.
Music, actually. Music is probably one of the primary ways I'm able to enter a sort of altered state of consciousness. Or maybe, I don't know if it's an altered state per se, as more like the realm of the imagination in the Blakean sense. Yeah, or that deeply romantic sense where the imagination is configured as the organ of truth, right? Where you become more truth conducive. And I'm sure so I listen to a lot of electronic music, actually. It's very melodic, euphoric sort of stuff that really feels like a journey. There's a guy called Niels Fram, I think he's a German producer, but his stuff is elegiac. There's a quality to it, you could cry. It's, for me, the best kind of music is that which encapsulates or conveys or bestows a sense of catharsis and ecstasis at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like it elates you just as it pulls you to the depths of pain. Not like it's painful, but it evokes that sense of just poignancy and the agony and the ecstasy, right? It's very kairotic to me, that moment, because again, it's like suffering and beauty and joy. It's like all of it, is there, rounded up for you, which is what the best literature does. That's what people like Virginia Woolf or T.S. Eliot or whoever are able to do, or Shakespeare. They give it to you all just there in the palm. It's like in the palm of your hand. It's like you touch. It's like a taste. Yeah. So it's like, how do we generate that? How do we cultivate that? Music is really amazing. And especially for me, music without words. I can get it from other sorts of music with lyrics. Some music with lyrics is poetry.
Yeah.
Just Leonard Cohen or whoever. There's really amazing music. But whatever it is for an individual, we'll each have our own preference. You obviously can't go wrong with classical music. It's like the pinnacle, but it'll be different for each person. So that's one thing. The moon never fails to do it for me. The
So true.
stars, yeah, but there's something about the moon and its quality. It's something about it
Yeah.
that I just find so deeply, disgustingly poetic. And her
Particularly
presence.
the rising moon.
Yeah, the waxing moon. I love a waxing crescent. There's a kind of twinkle to it. It's clouds,
Oh, yeah, cloud.
clouds also. So I'm writing a book at the moment. I've been working on it. I think you actually read a bit of it, which I'm reworking the whole thing. I think you read some of it for me very kindly a few years ago. But one of my, do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah, it's very rich. I'm looking
Thank
forward to seeing.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm really working and rewriting it all. But one of the chapters I'm calling Les Nuages, which obviously means the clouds in French.
Uh-huh.
And that whole chapter is about belonging and what it means to belong and what it means to come home. Coming home is obviously a really important concept for you, and it's the title of one of your books. So there's something about clouds. I don't know why. As a child, I would behold them and have this very deep sense that there were worlds and dimensions beyond our own. And they were in the sky, these sort of cloud realms. It was especially, is it cumulus? Cumulus?
Yeah.
Nimbus
Uh-huh.
clouds? The really,
The really fluffy ones.
the really voluminous ones, especially when there's
Oh.
a gorgeous sunset and it catches the light. It's a sense of the beyond. It's like we're not alone and there's a whole realm and it's deeply benign and deeply beautiful. It's Kairos. It evokes the sense of the all. It's the infinite within the finite. Everything that we've been talking about. But what am I talking about? I'm talking about art and nature, really, aren't I? Art and nature is a very sort of romantic
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there for
endeavor.
sure. Yeah, I imagine you must like Joni Mitchell's Clouds.
I don't know Joni Mitchell's clouds.
Oh, really? Oh my God. Listen to the original recording, Clouds.
Okay.
It's so poignant. The lyrics are so poignant and her voice is just angelic.
Okay.
Joni Mitchell, Clouds. Listen to the original one, but then listen to her very famous performance from, I don't know when it was, 2010 maybe?
Okay.
Maybe it was 2000 or 2010. It's just like 30 or 40 years after,
Oh, wow.
where her angelic voice has evolved to a whole register lower.
Wow.
And there's poignancy of her knowing that she's looking back on her life and she sings Clouds. I'll send you the link of the original and
I'd love
and then
that.
her later performance. Yeah, it's an exquisitely beautiful song all around clouds, and it's capturing something of what we've been talking about in terms of the irrevocability
Yeah.
of life, but also the relation between some sense of the eternal and the finite.
So we can't complete this conversation until we've spoken or did at least touched on Nietzsche and the idea of the eternal recurrence. Just because the way you described that to me or to our class as one turn of the wheel was so profound. It was really like a life-changing moment. When I heard you say that, I was like, I understand everything right now in this moment. Everything felt like, just for me in that moment, I had the sense of felt again. I felt and I sensed and I apprehended the all, like this one eternal moment happening now, and it is turning, but it's only turning once, and it's all turning now. It's not this infinite repetition. Now, most people listening probably won't know Nietzsche's idea, so if you wouldn't mind just giving a really brief overview of what it is, and then your sort of conception of it, how we can conceive of it as a single turn of the wheel, and how this sort of impacts our understanding of time, like in relation to everything we've spoken about. And then that can close the conversation.
Okay, I'll try it. I think it begins, the starting point is an experience that I'm sure all of our listeners, or the vast majority, have had at one point or another, and that's the experience of déjà vu, or déjà vu, as people might say in English. That fleeting sense that the moment we're experiencing has happened before. And for some people, that can be quite a long and unsettling experience where there's the sense, wow, what's just about to happen. Usually it's close enough into the future that one can't say oh, this is going to happen, and then it happens. But there's a sense that if only we could have gotten the words out soon enough, we could have predicted exactly what was going to happen in the very next moment, because we're having the experience in the moment that this moment has happened before, right? So I imagine that this is what Nietzsche was dealing with. He must have had very profound experiences of deja vu. But then he went on to articulate it both philosophically and poetically. So he was aware of the ancient Stoics who, like the ancient Hindus, believed that the cosmos was a process of like flux, which underwent various forms of, we could say, development or even devolution from a state of perfection to decreasing states of, or increasing states of imperfection until the whole thing finally just collapses and burns up in a kind of universal fire and then starts over again. So this is the idea of samsara as an eternal recurrence. So the ancient Hindus and the Stoics believed this. The Stoics said in particular, though, that not only does the world come into being, go through processes, well, it comes into being as a kind of perfect whole and then degenerates and then is born again. The Stoics believed that in that process, that cyclical process of birth, death, birth, generation, decay, and death and rebirth, they believed that every moment within that process, down to the smallest detail, occurs again exactly the way it did before. And that presumably it had done so an infinite number of times in the past and will do so an infinite number of times in the future. So Nietzsche was aware of this idea from the Stoics, but he made it his own, most famously for the first time, I believe, in a passage of the Gay Science or the Joyful Wisdom, I think it is in German. Two different translations, the Gay Science or the Joyful Wisdom. But then most famously in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where he invites us to imagine this moment where, you know, this, I can't remember the details now, this spider hanging from its thread, the light on the leaves over there, whatever. Every single detail, you're having an experience where you realize that every single detail of this extended moment has happened before an infinite number of times, exactly the same way, and that it will happen an infinite number of times exactly the same way in the future. And in that realization, it's not only a kind of metaphysical realization about the nature of time as eternal recurrence. For Nietzsche, it's a kind of ethical Kairos moment, which he describes as the greatest weight, the greatest ethical weight. Once you realize that, oh my God, not only this moment, but the next moment is going to occur eternally. Therefore, what I choose to do in this moment matters infinitely because its consequences will be there to infinity, right?
Yeah.
To take a concrete example, you're with your beloved and you're given a choice in a moment. Perhaps you feel hurt for one reason or another. And you have a choice to forgive or to close your heart. And I'm speaking out of experience because I realize how painful this is. When I realized in the moment that I've closed my heart to my beloved. And sometimes when that happens, I see the hurt on her face. This just could be a little thing, just common everyday things that happens in relationships. But sometimes in those moments when I actually see the pain, that my choice in that moment to close my heart relative to the beloved, how that causes pain. And now I imagine that pain that I'm causing my beloved is going to last forever, is going to happen again and again. Now, obviously, this is amplified even more if you imagine really consequential actions like hurting a child,
Yeah.
devastating a landscape or whatever. If our actions actually, if our choices in the moment, if the actions will recur infinitely, then, my God, that really does become the greatest ethical weight that we can bear. Now, for Nietzsche, he says, what do we do once we realize that? And he says, we have a choice. We can either recoil in fear from that realization and curse the day that we realized it. Or we can bless it with a kind of unconditional joy and affirmation and say that, okay, I'm going to say yes to life, yes to this possibility in the moment, to love, as you were saying, basically, to bless, whether that's through love or through forgiveness or through generosity. So that's the choice we're given. Now, for Nietzsche, he invites us to come to that existential choice of either cursing or blessing through insight arising out of this experience of the what he calls the eternal recurrence, eternal recurrence of the same. In my own experience, meditating on these kinds of experiences, in my own metaphysical reflection, I should say, it has occurred to me time and again that yes, we can imagine this as having occurred infinitely in the past and that it will occur infinitely in the future. Or if we take the Zoroastrian, Judaic, and Christian view seriously, and since I was raised in the Christian tradition, I do take it seriously, that the arrow of time actually has an absolute beginning and an absolute end, then how can we make sense of these experiences of déjà vu and of the kind of experience that Nietzsche was happening? How do we make sense of that within the metaphysics of a once-only life and a once-only creation? And what has occurred to me again and again is the kind of experience that I think you and I both share and that others share as well, of what I call integral time, where not only those moments, those kairotic moments, but actually every moment which from our ordinary experience unfolds chronologically, one moment after another, from a higher dimensional perspective, whether that be from the perspective of our true soul nature or that of angels or of the Godhead itself. Each of these moments is somehow actually happening eternally. So it's not that it happens repeatedly again and again. So it's not that God is looking at a loop tape and having to see things go over and over again. It's more like what we experience as a sequence, they experience as a kind of maybe almost like a painting. I have to spatialize it again.
Yeah.
It's like a contemplation or if we could, yeah, the flower that we see come out as a seed and blossom and die, somehow they see that whole process as one, at once, but not just as a static kind of dead flower pinned to a wall, but as something that is happening eternally.
Yeah.
It's very hard to articulate, but
we've kind of been exploring this throughout the conversation, though, haven't we?
Yes, exactly.
That's actually the thread of the whole thing. The thing is, if it's happening now, but the moment never passes, we just pass through it, but it continues after we have passed through it. In some sense, we are always passing through it.
That's right. And the passing, the passing too happens eternally. So it's not just,
exactly.
it's not just that the moments are happening eternally.
No,
but the passage of the moments are happening.
Yes. It requires a certain elasticity of consciousness, I think, to grasp it.
It does.
I do personally grasp it. I'm not saying, oh, I'm right. I'm just saying this is something I sense and I understand it, whatever it is I'm sensing.
Yeah.
Our ability to communicate it to others is up for debate.
I've seen you get it repeatedly, and it's been a source of great delight for me to find somebody who actually not only intellectually understands, but obviously has had very similar, if not identical, experiences. But it's hard to talk about. I think we need a certain kind of mental mode of complex thinking, a kind of integral way of thinking that can help us speak in a way that is adequate to the experiences we're talking about.
I really like that the phrase you use is just one turn of the wheel. The wheel is always turning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like it just goes it starts here and it turns once and then it's done. It's that it's always turning. And if you spin something fast enough, you can't, like if you spin like a light, like a sparkler or something, even though it's one point going around, it's not everywhere all at once. If you do it fast enough, it looks like it's, do you know what I mean? I also see, for some, I don't know why, but for some reason that feels relevant.
Yeah, you're reminding me of these very old Paleolithic, or are they Neolithic? No, I think they're Paleolithic carved bone discs that were hard for people to interpret at one point. They're like on one side is the sketched outline of a gazelle with its legs in one position. On the other side, they're in another position. But when you put the disc on a string through the hole in the middle and then twirl it, the disc moves back and forth, and you get this image of the gazelle running.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Kinetic.
Yeah. So even our Paleolithic ancestors were able to enact that mystery. We're driven to try to enact that mystery of the relation between the static and the moving, and have that as one through their own agency by creating something of beauty. Yeah.
I think that is such a beautiful place to end the conversation on. Thank you so much. That's really enriched my life, and I'm sure it will enrich everyone who listens to this as well. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, Sean. That was just amazing.
As always, Arabella, it's a delight and enriching for me to connect with you on these topics. And I look forward to next time.
Likewise. I'll be in touch really soon. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to go deeper into my work and find out about my offerings at the Temple, my School of Consciousness and Metaphysics, just head to my website, www.arabellataís.com, for more information, all the links in the show notes. See you next time.